welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Julia Dahl is a journalist and author. Her novels include The Missing Hours, Conviction, Run You Down, and Invisible City, which was a finalist for the Edgar Award for Best First Novel, one of the Boston Globe's Best Books of 2014, and has been translated into 8 languages. Her 5th novel, I Dreamed of Falling, is out now. A former reporter for CBS News and the New York Post, Julia now teaches journalism at NYU. She holds a BA from Yale and master's degrees in creative writing and journalism from the New School and American University. She lives in the Hudson Valley with her husband and son. Julia Dahl, thank you so much for being here today. You were the very first guest ever on the Literary Prospects podcast, and I am so excited to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
Yay, it's exciting to talk about your new novel, your 5th, I Dreamed of Falling. Booklist says I Dreamed of Falling is a perfectly crafted thriller that goes beyond a classic whodunit. Layered with complicated character arcs, unforeseen twists, and well-thought-out details, this novel will be on the minds of readers well after they've finished. The Los Angeles Times says Dahl has created a heart-wrenching drama of family dysfunction and small-town gentrification that makes I Dreamed of Falling a story greater than the sum of its parts. In a starred review, Publishers Weekly says Dahl's gift for suspense will keep readers flipping pages, but in the end, it's her finely wrought characters they'll remember. And in another starred review, Library Journal calls I Dreamed of Falling a devastating crime novel. And author Gillian Flynn says I Dreamed of Falling is one of those rare novels in which you feel the pulse of every single character. It's an uncompromising look at love and its complications, and a frank, sometimes burning story about the tricky business of learning how to be a grown-up. With I Dreamed of Falling, Julia Dahl proves she's simply one of the best thriller writers working today. So with that, what can you tell us about I Dreamed of Falling?
Oh, thank you so much. That's always, it's nice to hear that stuff. Yeah, I Dreamed of Falling is the story of Roman Grady, who is the only reporter in a tiny Hudson Valley town. And his girlfriend, who's the mother of his 4-year-old son, is found dead. And the police think that it's an overdose. She does have a history of some drug use, and she was at a place where drugs are used, but he's pretty convinced that that's not what happened. So he sort of starts digging, and he comes to realize that not only did he really have no idea what was going on in the life of the woman that he loved and who he lived with, but he also kind of has no idea what else is going on in the town, that everybody's keeping secrets. So I Dreamed of Falling is basically the story of his investigation into what happened to Ashley.
And with your 4 previous novels, you said that the ideas for the premise came from stories that you covered as a reporter, but this one was much more personal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It sort of this novel came out of 2 things that sort of happened in my life. The first was that I had a little boy. I became a mom, and that first few weeks and months was really hard for me, which a lot of parents go through that, and you become very myopic. It's very hard to see outside of the crying baby, the sleepless nights, the feeling that you're failing constantly, the idea that, I was a professional, I was a 38-year-old woman who had a career, and I was good at stuff. And then I bring this little 5-pound infant home, and I felt like I was useless, like I was not making him happy. And And I also felt like I had just completely given away my life. It was just it was a struggle. Um, and there were times where I remember thinking, gosh, if somebody could just take this away, that like I want to go back to my other life. And oddly, or fortunately, my sister-in-law, my husband's sister, lived near us, and she doesn't have kids of her own. And she sort of swooped in and said, "Well, let me help. I can, my husband was working a ton, and I was struggling, and she said, "Let me help. I'll take what, the burden away from you. I'll, you sleep, I'll help and clean and be with the baby and do the stuff that, we used to have a village to be able to do,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so, that was a godsend for me and really for my son, who's now almost 9. He and his aunt are like best friends. I mean, she's kind of become like a second mom to him in like a way that is just really great for the whole family. Um, but because I'm a mystery novelist, I'm always sort of thinking about, well, what if something went really wrong, right?
Yeah.
And so I started thinking about this scenario of a woman who maybe was much younger than me, like barely a woman, even 21 years old, who maybe gets pregnant accidentally, who doesn't have a steady income, who doesn't really have, the grown up, even little bits of wisdom you do by the time you're 38. And the pregnancy is difficult. She gives birth during COVID. What if she comes home, she's depressed, she doesn't feel moored, and someone says to her, "Let me take the burden away from you." And she lets them. And she really sort of takes a back seat then to raising her child. Fast forward 4 years, she realizes, I don't really have a relationship with my kid. And then this is the character of Ashley, who's the woman who is dead at the beginning of the book. So I kind of just wanted to spin that family scenario of multi-generations helping each other, but when that sort of help goes wrong and what that push and pull is about, parenting and that kind of thing. And then the other thing that the book was inspired by really was my move from New York City to a very small town in the Hudson Valley. I'd never lived in a small town. I grew up in Fresno, California, which is not a big city, but it's, about 500,000 people. And all of a sudden, I live in a town where there's 3,000 people, and like my high school had 3,000 people, And so it was just a whole different, it's a little like, I mean, if you moved to a big city and it was new to you, you're just excited and inspired by all the things that are different. And what was so different to me was how everybody knew everybody. And not just that they knew everybody, but they knew everybody's family history. Like if your grandfather had done something stupid and everybody knew about it, people were still talking about it 2 generations later. Like there was a sense of like, you can't, in a small town, you can't escape your past or your family's past. And that was really interesting to me. So that was another thing that I kind of folded into this book.
But yet, there's still so many secrets.
Oh my God. Right, right. That's right. Exactly. Right. So that like we all know everybody, but do we
Do you
really?
really
And that
know?
was one of the things too is, I've been married now for almost 15 years and I know a lot of other married people and even people who are partnered and you start to realize that like you can go through days not really knowing what's going on with the people in your family, with your partner. You can kind of be ships passing the night, you do dinner, you do this and that, but like you don't take the time to really check in. And when you don't do that, you really start missing things.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that this book does have in common with your first three novels is that there's a reporter at the heart of this story, which in Roman is a
Yes.
reporter. What draws you to writing about reporters?
I mean, aside from the fact that it's easy for me because I've been a reporter for so long and I know so many other reporters and I now teach journalism. So I love journalism. I think I think reporting is just an inherently interesting profession because you're getting outside every day writing about things that are going on in the world outside of you, right? So it exposes you to all kinds of stories and people. So reporters can be great characters in novels because you kind of can put them anywhere. But the thing that I really wanted to do, but also I have things to say about the world of journalism, and my first three novels were about a tabloid reporter, and I had worked at the New York Post, which is a tabloid, and I felt like I had things to say about what I felt like was some of the unethical stuff that went on at a paper like that, and that goes on into sort of, the larger clickbait journalism world, right? But also about the importance of doing your work carefully. One of the big themes in the first three novels, especially the first novel, Invisible City, was that if you're careless with your work, bad things happen. And the character of Rebecca in that book was sort of, she kind of didn't take her work super seriously, and all of a sudden that became a problem. But in this book, in I Dreamed of Falling, Roman is a small town reporter. Like, he is the only reporter in the town. There's a newspaper in town owned by a really rich guy, but they don't give the paper enough money to have it really any staff. So there's an editor in chief who's also the publisher, and he's, in his 70s. And then there's Roman, and he's making, like, I mean, and this is what happens in newspapers all over the place. It's like they're making, 40 grand a year, 45 grand a year to put together a newspaper covering, dozens, if not more, square miles of all kinds of people, all multiple towns, planning, everything. So that means that no real reporting gets done. It's like a newsletter, right? It's like, okay, well, we're just covering the track meet, and there was a school board meeting, but we're not really looking at, like, what happened during the school board meeting, and who said what, and who's promising what, and who's connected to who, and all the stuff that investigative reporters are supposed to do. If you're making 45 grand a year and you're running all over the place trying to just cover everybody's track meet and, like, bench dedication, you can't do that stuff. And so all the shenanigans that go on in government, and all the back scratching and this and that, doesn't get covered. It's basically invisible, because the industry of journalism has really fallen apart. I always say, like, I do not think it's a coincidence that our democracy is imperiled at the same time as the profession of journalism is falling apart, right? Like, people don't want to pay for the news, but the news isn't free to make, and all these, I mean, I think it's, thousands of local newspapers have disappeared in the last 20 years, which means that in these small towns, nobody's watching. And I really wanted to write about that. I also wanted to write about the frustration of being a reporter like Roman. Like, he really had ambition. He wanted to be an investigative reporter. He had gotten, before Ashley gets pregnant, he'd gotten a fellowship to go work at the LA Times, and then he sees all his classmates from college who were in journalism school writing about all this exciting stuff, and living a life he wanted to live, but he, for various reasons and choices he made to stay with Ashley and to raise their son, doesn't get to do that. And it's really broken down his self-esteem, and he's become depressed. And I think there are a lot of reporters like that these days.
Yeah. Yeah. But you've said that your favorite character in the novel is not Roman, our reporter,
Right.
but 4-year-old Mason.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I mean, he's not, like, based on my son, but he sort of is, in that, like, he's almost 9 now, but when I was writing this book and before, I have a little boy, and he's so interesting to me. Kids are, I mean, I never babysat. I was not really interested in kids. I didn't, I was like, I don't really like your, I mean, I was like, okay, you're cute, but, like, I don't really want to hang out with your kid. Like, some people are just good with kids. I was never. But once I had my own, I mean, like, there's this, like, amazing, like, kind of love and connection. And then when they start getting to be in that, like, sort of over 3, really, they start being really interesting and having such interesting insights, and such what I love about kid sorry, that was loud. What I love about kids is how honest they are, right? Like, they almost don't have the ability with their emotions, especially, to fake it. Whereas the rest of us have grown to recognize we're not allowed to, like, cry in public. We're supposed to look strong and stuff. And Mason's mom at the beginning of this book has died, and they her family has to tell him that, and he has to deal with that. And how he deals with it is in a way important for the old adult characters because he really forces them to deal with the issues that are going on, whereas they kind of want to push it away and pretend we don't feel this, we don't feel this, but Mason is feeling everything.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that's wonderful about them is that sometimes they'll just get caught up in something that is not sadness, right? Like even the worst thing has happened, his mother has died. But if he happens to see a friend on the playground who hasn't seen in a while, it's like everything changes. So
Mhm.
I just loved making him and sort of giving him letting him give some humor and some emotion to the story that only kids have.
Yeah. And you do a great job at it. He sounds so real in that, which is hard to do.
Right, right.
And we get to hear from Ashley
Hmm.
in the book, who is no longer with us, as we know, but we do get to hear from her at several points throughout the story. So, how did you make that decision to sort of structure in that way that we also get to hear from Ashley?
Such a good question. I mean, I think for me, Ashley was always the book started with her perspective. It's funny, even though Roman is really the main character of the book started with Ashley and Tara. So Tara is Roman's mother, Ashley's mother-in-law, and the one who really takes over Mason's life once Ashley gives birth. So the book started with Ashley and Tara, and so I always knew I wanted to give Ashley's perspective. But I also realized, okay, well, she's not alive. How am I going to do
Right.
that? And I sort of looked around and sort of played with different things, and I realized also that I really didn't want to write a book that was sort of like I think it's Laura Lippman who talks about a lot of sort of old school mystery thriller crime fiction novels are like a woman dies and a man is sad. And I didn't want this book to be that, right? Because it is sort of that. It's like Roman, her partner is sad because his woman has died, his best friend has died. But I also knew that the story I wanted to tell was the story of obviously like not just the aftermath of Ashley's death, but what led up to it.
Mhm.
So I wanted to give her, it was always important to me to give her a voice, but right, how to do that? That was something that I struggled with and played around a lot with. And all my novels, like I'm actually, I'm writing a new novel now and already like, I think I have about 10,000 words but I've got like 12,000 that I've already cut, And so and that's how it was with I Dreamed of Falling. It was like I would just trial and error. Does this sound right? But I always wanted her voice to sort of linger over in this sort of kind of omniscient way. A little bit like, I remember if you remember there was a book, gosh, it's probably 20 years old called The Lovely Bones about a
Oh,
little girl,
yes, yeah.
right? And
Yeah, yeah,
you get her perspective too. And I loved that because it was really important to me that her story be told.
yeah. How do your characters come to you? Do you
Mm.
sort of base on people that you know or someone that you've seen, or are they talking in your head and you sort of hear the voice first? What does that look like for you?
Um, it's a combination. Usually, often it comes with a scenario. What if this happened? And
Mm-hmm.
then usually like with that scenario, it comes with, okay, well, what if this happened to these people? And it's really usually my books start, this one certainly did, with a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then other relationships build out of that. And then, all my characters are sort of a giant mishmash of bits of me, bits of people I know, bits of people I don't know but see, sort of passer, somebody like, I mean, actually, my first novel, Invisible City, the relationship between the main character and she has a boyfriend at the time was inspired by, I mean, literally, I was riding the subway one day and I saw this couple and something about them just sort of piqued my interest and I started like making up a story. So it's always a mix of that.
Mm-hmm. You've called I Dreamed of Falling a family drama wrapped in a murder mystery.
Right.
Can you talk about what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I love reading murder mysteries or mysteries. I guess it doesn't have to be, where something bad has happened and you sort of find out who did it at the end, right? Like I love that puzzle aspect of
Mhm.
the mystery genre, the crime fiction genre. Um, and so that is, and in some ways it makes, for me as a writer, it's, I don't, easier is the wrong word, but it helps me plot a book to know I've got a dead person at the beginning and we figure out who did it, at the end. And that helps me
Mhm.
like, it's almost like a little skeleton and then I can populate the other stuff. I know A and I know Z and then I get to have lots of fun in the middle. But 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 what's really interesting to me about writing is, I mean, writing is really how I process the world. And as since I got married and had a child and have, moved out of the city into the suburbs, and my family life is like very much the center of my life, I've gotten more interested in families. And I feel like much of my life now, because I live, I'm always at like sports games or PTA meetings, all that stuff. So like the life of the family in America today is something that I'm just really interested in. So I definitely wanted the story really to be about a family dealing with a death. And like, yeah, you figure out who did it and why, and that's satisfying, hopefully. But
Mhm.
along the way, you're having a journey with a family who are going through stuff that frankly a lot of people go through. Everything from guilt and infidelity to misunderstanding and miscommunication and regret and forgiveness. Um, so that was the kind of stuff that is like kind of most interesting to me. And then I kind of, I kind of stick it inside a murder mystery.
Speaking of family, you dedicated the book to your parents.
Right. Yes.
Can you talk about why?
Yeah. I was blessed with really great parents. I mean, I had a really happy childhood. Like, I feel like there are very few people who can say that these days, but I really did. My parents loved each other. They still love each other. They're like best friend. I mean, they're totally best friends, and they've been together 52 years now.
Wow.
Um, and they were really good parents in that they built a family where our family was important. My dad was a lawyer, and when he went to go get a job, he could have gotten a job in a couple big cities, but decided, no, let's move to Fresno where I can make a decent living and I can still come home at 6 o'clock every night. I don't have to like burn the midnight oil in order to make partner in San Francisco or something. And that choice really kind of created the family we have. Um, and I think also like, now that I'm a parent, I feel like my parents made it look really easy to like just, have a stable family, happy family. And I know it wasn't easy. So I'm really thankful to them for having, been able to create that. I mean, some of it was luck, but a lot of it was, you know, making choices that were healthy for the whole family. So, and I mean, they made me a reader. My mom's motto is bring a book. Like where, since I was a child, wherever you go, just bring a book. You'll never be bored. My dad's they're both like huge readers and really encouraged that in me and always really encouraged my writing. So, yeah.
The book doesn't take place during the COVID lockdown, but the pandemic and its effects are still very present
Right.
in the
Right.
novel. Why was that important to you to?
Right. It was really important. So I feel like, I mean, I didn't want to write a COVID novel, partly because I always want to write a book I want to read, and I don't want to read a novel set in COVID. And I don't think most do. I mean,
Yes.
I think as we get further away, it'll be more palatable, but I feel like we all are like living with mass PTSD from that time. But I did like basically the lockdown kind of kicks off the events of the novel. Basically, Ashley is pregnant and she has to give birth like in the very beginning of the COVID lockdown. So she's alone in the hospital because they're not allowing people in. She's having to wear, a mask while giving birth, and she ends up having to have an emergency C-section. Again, she's all alone. She nearly dies. And then she comes home and, she's traumatized, but also she has no ability then to reach out to any kind of community because she's locked in her house like the rest of us were. And the stress of having a tiny baby compounds that, and like that, it makes you want to like get out and get back into real life, and there was no real life to get back to. So, and I really think for them, that created the dynamic that, led to what ends up, sort of beginning in the novel. But I think that so many of us, we're still living at, like, so many families were so impacted in so many ways by the pandemic. I mean, like, because within the same, it could be like some people were like, screw it, I'm going to the bar. And
Mhm.
some people were like, you will not come near me without a mask and a vaccine and a face mask or something. And those people could live in the same house, right? Like everybody had totally different reactions. And I think a lot of real cracks formed in families. I saw so many divorces, right? I saw so
Yeah.
many kids, right? And so many kids, I mean, we're just now realizing, of course, like really understanding the impact the lack of school and the lack of community
Mhm.
had on kids of all ages, right? And the way I mean, all this stuff is still playing out and will continue to play out for a long time. And I did want to sort of acknowledge that and explore that a little bit,
Yeah.
that the legacy of the pandemic is very much still with us and probably will be for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We heard that wonderful blurb from Gillian Flynn earlier. And in a recent interview on The Poisoned Pen, Gillian said that she worships you. That's what she said.
Yeah.
So, can you talk a little bit about this literary friendship and
Right.
how it developed?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's just like a fluke. My very first job when I graduated college in 1999, so we're like more than like 25 years ago, was that I was an intern at Entertainment Weekly, and that was the same time that Gillian was working as, I think she was like the assistant TV editor or something. I mean, she was like, higher up than me, but not super high up in the magazine. And I would literally like make photocopies for her. Like every one of my jobs every morning was that I had to gather up, back when there were actual physical papers, I had to gather up a whole bunch of the newspapers and photocopy like the gossip pages and the entertainment pages. And then I'd create a packet and give it to all the editors to look at. She was one of the people I did that for. And she was nice. I mean, we were not like close friends at all. But she was nice to me and I thought she was interesting. And then fast forward to about 2006-ish when her first book, Sharp Objects, came out. I just like happened to be in a Barnes and Noble and saw the book. And if you remember Sharp Objects, it had a really striking cover. It was
Yeah.
black with a razor blade on it, and it was like raised. And I remember just like going to the book being like, that's interesting. And I picked it up and I saw her name and I looked in the back and I was like, I know that girl. She used to work at Entertainment Weekly. So I read the book in like a day. And I had this total epiphany where I was like, because I had written a novel a few years before that was not very good, was like a kind of quote unquote literary novel that I'd written, and I couldn't find an agent. And, I mean, thank God it was never published. But I'd been wanting to write again and I kind of wasn't sure what to do. And I read her book and I thought, well, that's the book I want to write. I was like, it was the first time I realized that I had always read mysteries. Like that was
Mhm.
that was what I booked, but somehow it didn't connect in my mind that I should write a mystery. But when I read Sharp Objects, I was like, that's the book I want to write, like dark, female, driven. Uh,
Mhm.
so that propelled me in some ways to think about that genre as the genre that I wanted to write. And then a couple of years later, I started writing what became my first novel, Invisible City. So then again, fast forward another 6 years, and it's early 2012. So before Gone Girl came out. So before Gillian was like the biggest author in the world. And
Mhm.
I emailed her or maybe I like Facebook messaged her. And I said, like, I'm not sure you remember me, but about 10 years ago, I was an intern. I'm a fan of your work. And I said, like, something like, I've just finished a novel. I wonder if you have any advice for like a young, an early novelist. And she wrote me back and she said, I gave her a little like couple sentence description of what my book was. And she said, oh, that sounds interesting. You should email my agent. And she gave me her agent's email and her agent became my agent. And now, and she blurbed my first book. And I have, I always send her my work and she's just been really kind to me.
That's so great to hear. It's so nice to hear when people are nice.
You know
You know?
what? And And it's so true. And it was actually like a really um nice beginning to my life as a crime fiction novelist because frankly the world of crime fiction is the nicest world of people. Like, I
Mhm.
mean, maybe you wouldn't think that, but we are this group of people is like, and that was exactly what Gilligan was like, yeah, email my agent. And then when my book came out, I went to there's a mystery convention every year for mystery authors. I went to that knowing nobody, and immediately people are like, "Oh, come have a drink with us, come have dinner with us." And it's that community of people is so generous, and we all do that kind of stuff for each other. Somebody's looking for an agent, oh, I'll give you my agent's name. Do you need a like, I'll put you to the top of my list to see if I can blurb you, and just it's a community of people who are super generous. Like we all just kind of feel like, publishing is a hard industry to be in. Being an author is, a huge privilege, but also not easy. It's not an easy sort of way to make a living or way to make art. And everybody feels like they've got everybody's back. It's so cool. Yeah.
That's awesome. This is your fifth novel.
Right.
You've published five now, five crime novels. How is this experience different the fifth time around
Yeah.
than, the first time around?
Right. I feel like I just have a lot more understanding of the process. I have a lot lower expectations. I mean, when you grow up thinking, oh, I've always wanted to be a novelist, and then your first novel comes out and it was great. I mean, don't get me wrong, my first novel was super well received. I won a bunch of awards. I mean, I could not ask for better, but did my life actually change? Not really.
Mhm.
It's not like I don't make enough money on my books to not have to do anything else. I teach, I was a reporter. Um, um, and it's not like I walk down the street and anybody recognizes me. I mean, it doesn't change your day-to-day life, but
Mhm.
it does. So I know to sort of temper my expectations about that even when, great things happen, that your day-to-day life is still just you doing the work of being a writer, right? Like
Mhm.
I've written this novel and now I'm writing another one. I mean, partly because that's what I do. That's how I live is like I said, I process the world by writing and I love writing. I love telling stories. Um, but I also know now that there's so much that's totally out of my control, right? Like how
Yeah.
well the book sells, does it make this list or that list or this book club or just that I can't do anything about any of that. And knowing that is now, after so many years, is helpful that I kind of say my job is to write the best book I can, the book like I said, I want to read, the book that I feel like speaks to this time. And the rest, I do my social media song and dance and I do the best I can. I go to book clubs. I just 2 days ago, I was at a library about an hour away doing an event there. I always, I go to as many events as I can where almost, anywhere I'm invited that I can drive
Yeah.
or that I can get online. And try to connect with as many readers as possible. But the rest is like, really sort of for me, what's exciting, what's changed is that I now have a community. I have a lot of friends, most of them don't live where I live, but who are authors, and we're all trying to do the same thing, live this kind of artistic life, but also have to deal with the marketplace. And now I feel like I have support, and I love that. I love that. But I also know that there are going to be ups and downs. My first book was really well received and sold really well. My second book not so much. And then it's like you kind of just have to take it as it comes.
You mentioned that you are teaching journalism at NYU now as well. So I'm curious about how your work as a journalism professor
Mhm.
affects your writing.
Right. Well, I mean, I just love reporters. Like I call myself a journalist evangelist, and my next book will have a reporter in it because I just love writing about them. Um, but journalism taught me a lot, like a lot about that is useful as a novelist. I mean, it taught me, among other things, like that that writing every day is really useful. That you can't be super precious about everything you write. You just have to, especially in a first draft. I'm a big believer of just bang it out. I mean, one of my favorite writers, Megan Abbott, her advice is always write badly. And you do. You
Mhm.
have to allow yourself to write badly. You can't be afraid of writing badly or you'll never get to good writing. So, and journalism in a way taught me that like the first draft isn't what's going to get on there and you have to just bang it out and then work with it. Journalism also, what's so great about it is that you have access to so many stories that are outside your experience, and that is inspiring to me. So a lot of my ideas for books come from stories I've covered, but even not like that specific A to B line, just sort of like I get to be in the world in a way as a journalist. And now teaching journalism, um, first of all, yeah, I get to be connected to a whole different generation, right? I mean, these are,
Mhm.
a lot my students in one of my classes are, you know, they're 19, they're 20. They see the world in a totally different way. Their experience is totally different. I learn a lot from that. Um, and I think and that's sort of inspiring to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You've said that you believe that fiction is the place where you build your empathy.
Have I said that? That's smart.
You
Yeah, I think I
did.
have. Well, it's true. I mean, it's true in that, like, I do believe that reading fiction, while reading nonfiction can also build your empathy. I mean, it takes you to places and stuff. But the thing that nonfiction really can't do, because one person cannot get inside another person's head, and get it on the record, right? Like
Yeah.
that doesn't, that is not possible. And that was one of the things that even though I'd always wanted to write, that really drew me, that forced me in a way to write fiction as while I was a journalist, because I felt like I was on the outside of so many interesting stories and I couldn't get in the way I wanted to. I really wanted to be like, well, what does that feel like? Why is she making that decision? And even if I could ask that question, what does that feel like? Why did you make that decision? First of all, they might not articulate it in a truthful way. They might not even know they're not being truthful. They might not be able to articulate it. They might not want to tell me, right? Like there's all these like barriers.
Mhm.
But when you write fiction and when you read fiction, the job of the author is to get inside the character's head, and imagine yourself into that, right? And that to me, that's why I do it. Like I get to be other people when I'm writing and when I'm reading fiction. And so that to me, I mean, I don't know who said it. I mean, I think it's like attributed to Mark Twain, but it probably wasn't, because everything was that, art is the lie that tells the truth. And I
Mhm.
I really truly believe that.
What is your process like when you kind of start out with that germ of an idea? Um, what's the next thing that happens? How does
Right.
that then go to,
Yeah.
the finished
Right. Right.
manuscript in the computer?
I mean, it's a long and not straight line process. It's like, like I said, I kind of usually a scenario slash relationship becomes something that I'm interested in. And I spend a lot of time just sort of thinking about it. I take walks. I mean, that's really where there's time spent in front of my computer typing, but as much or more of it is just walking around sort of with as much as I can, like a focused thinking, right? Like I'm going to take a walk and think about this character's relationship to this character, how they got here, or what this, if I'm in the writing process, what the next scene is. What does this
Mhm.
person want out of this scene? So I do a lot of that. And I try to be deliberate about it too, like things like I drive 40 minutes to one of the places I teach. And so I force myself often to not put on a podcast or music and just think like, okay, on this drive, I'm going to consider why this person makes this phone call, whatever it is.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of that thinking, and I take a lot of notes in the beginning on sort of character traits, why this person I mean, what people want is really like very much what you're trying to do in a book, or when you're writing a book, when you're writing a scene, you have to think, well, what does this character want out of
Mhm.
this particular instance, overall, and then also in this interaction. Um, so I take a lot of notes about people's motivations, people's backgrounds, and I'm kind of sketching. And I have like basically a moleskin notebook that I just sort of write things down, and there's no rhyme or it'll be like one day I'm writing about one person, one day I'm writing another, one day I'm skipped ahead and stuff, and it kind of is just like a a generative thing for me. And then
Mhm.
I'll get to the computer and start writing a scene. And I do usually start at the very beginning. I write the first line or whatever, and I write the first chapter, and it doesn't always end up staying like that. But I start writing scenes, and then I start to get to know the characters and the world, and then I delete them and write again. I never actually delete anything though. I create like documents of what I call outtakes. So each character
Hmm.
has his or her own outtakes folder. So like for I Dreamed
Mhm.
of Falling, Roman and Tara and Ashley all have a document with, tens of thousands of words in it that I pulled from their points of view that I no longer need, that I was like, this doesn't work. Um,
Mhm.
so I do that, a lot of that. And that's kind of, and then as I start writing forward, I try to, like right now, I'm like when we get off the phone, I'm going to try to work on, I just finished a chapter. I'm going to, okay, next chapter. So I try to stay a little bit ahead of myself in my kind of notebook of, so I know a chapter or two ahead what's going to happen, so that when I sit down, I have some sense of like where this scene I'm about to write is going. Because otherwise it's really hard if you're just like, okay, I have no idea what I'm about to write. You really need to kind of at least for me, I need to be like, okay, in this scene, this happens. And then I kind of plow it out. And sometimes it changes, but if I have some kind of goal for each
Mhm.
writing session, and my writing sessions can be often they're very short. I mean, I have to find time in the middle of in the middle of being a mom and being a teacher and all that kind of thing. So I often will write in like 15-minute increments, sometimes a few at a time, and sometimes that's all I can do in a day is 15 minutes. But if I get 100 or 200 words, like that really starts to add up.
Do you outline
I
at any
don't.
point?
I should. I wish I was that person. I wish I was
Mhm.
an outliner because frankly, I think the whole thing would probably go faster. Um, I think I would maybe be able to head off like things that when I'm not writing with a head outline, I realize, oh, geez, like I just knocked into a timeline problem, and I need to go
Mhm.
back. But I find outline really boring. And I feel like I don't all I do know like for almost all my books, I know because they're all the murder mysteries, or all except for one, who dies at the beginning and who did it and why. Um, but I don't know how I'm going to unfold that story.
Okay.
So I do have that. I did try what I've done with this new book is one of the things. So one of the things I do also is I do developmental edits for other authors. So I do a lot of like editing other people's manuscripts, which has really helped me um, sort of understand the bones of a good novel. And
Mhm.
so one of the things that I worked with this book I'm writing now is I'm calling it like a suspicion arc. And the idea is that like because when you're reading a mystery novel, it's like the suspicion of like sort of who did it and why needs to move around, right? You need to
Mhm.
sort of
Mhm.
you need to, create like little tricks and little red herrings and maybe go back and forth. And so I created this kind of suspicion arc of like who at each point in the novel the reader is suspecting did it, and then what would be the reason, and then like sort of, and that's helpful for me because it's not a true outline, but it helps me sort of see the piece as a whole.
Yeah. That sort of guiding light for each.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
it'll probably change and stuff, but it helps me move forward.
Yeah. I love that. What is your best advice for aspiring authors?
The best advice is My best advice is write the book you want to read. I mean, really, you got to be all but obsessed with your book, and you got to be all but obsessed with you got to the characters, the scenario, the plot, the place. Like you have to really want to tell this story and live in this story. So really, don't write about anything you're not super interested in. Like, don't try to write a novel where you're kind of lukewarm because you won't finish it. And then the next piece of advice is write the first draft. Just keep going, keep going. If you find yourself in a spot where you're stuck and you think, well, I don't know what this character will do next, or I don't know how to get this character from A to B, just write like in journalism we use TK as a placeholder to come write TK scene here and move on. Just keep going forward because once you have a draft, even if it's super messy with holes all around it and bad writing, you have a whole product and then you start doing the work of polishing it. I think of it sometimes as like, you know, well, I think that was it Michelangelo maybe said something like, you have to chip away everything that's not the David. And I always, it's funny, I just heard that quote from somebody recently, and I've always thought of writing a novel as being like, I have a block of marble, and I know in there is an awesome is a
Mhm.
statue, but I have to just chip and chip and chip and chip and chip. And for a long time, it looks like a total mess. And then eventually it's like, oh my God, I got it. Yeah.
Well, that's exciting. Okay. Traditional last question.
Yeah.
When I Dreamed of Falling is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. Okay, so I actually just recently did like a annotated playlist for I Dreamed of
Mhm.
Falling. If you go to my various socials, you'll find it. I think there are a couple songs that really inspired this book. One is, and I'm not a Swiftie, but folklore. I like was not into Taylor Swift at all. I tend to like her songwriting. Like I think she's a really great lyricist, but I don't love the kind of poppy sound. But that album Folklore came out while I was writing this book during the pandemic, and there's a song on there called Betty that's it's really like to me, I'm a big Bruce Springsteen fan. It's like a Bruce Springsteen song. It's the song of it's a, like from the point of view of a 17-year-old teen boy who is basically trying to get his girlfriend to get back with him because he cheated on her. And it's this beautiful like love story song. And it gives me chills just thinking about it. So maybe Betty by Taylor Swift, but the other one would be there's a great singer-songwriter. Um, wait a minute, no, there's the other one is a song by a band, a random band that I didn't know about called The Glorious Sons, and it's called Sawed Off Shotgun. And it's really about a song about people who are really desperate. Like the chorus is like they sent the tax man, I lost my job, I bought a sawed off shotgun. Because this book in a lot of ways is about like people pushed financially and emotionally to the edge.
Yeah,
And like, what do you do? So one of those two.
great. Can't wait.
I know.
Julia Dahl, thank you so much for being on today. It has been so exciting to get to talk to you again. Thank you for being the first second guest.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I so appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.